And welcome to the webinar. My name is Phil Winters, and I'm joining you today from Heidelberg, Germany.
Hi, I'm Scott Fincher. I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas, in the US.
Hey, Scott, it's good to see you again.
Hey, Phil.
What we're going to do today is we're going to run a webinar about the KNIME software ecosystem and how it affects lots of different people in the organization. Now, for those of you that may know KNIME, you probably know the KNIME Analytics Platform. The KNIME Analytics Platform is our complete platform, open source. Download and use it. It's what individuals use to create great data science. And if you know KNIME, that's probably what you've already gotten familiar with. And if you have people in your team that have said, hey, KNIME, we kind of like it, it's because they'll probably be using the KNIME Analytics Platform. This webinar is not about the details of using the KNIME Analytics Platform for individuals, because what we find is that this is what people know and love. There's over 3,000 different what we call nodes that are available in the platform that you can connect together to get any data source, do transformation, do ETL, do your analytics, your data mining, do lots of visualization. And at the end of the day, we actually make sure you can get it out in the right form so that it can be used. And that's the KNIME Analytics Platform. Now, if you're interested in the details of this, we have other webinars that are designed for you. What we're going to do instead of focusing on the core technology, next slide, please, is we're going to expand the view a little bit to teams. You see, because individuals are out there creating great data science. You go through a process yourself. Sometimes you may call this CRISP. We have a diagram here that talks about getting the data, blending and transforming it, modeling, visualizing it, optimizing and capture, all of those day-to-day activities that individuals will want to do in the data science space. At the end of the day, we're trying to create something. But that's for the individual. What we find is that when you expand that and take a look at this holistically across the entire organization, there's actually two things that have to join together. We have to be able to not only create great data science, but we have to be able to optimize, use, and deploy it in many, many different ways. We're in this webinar going to focus on both loops together. In other words, data science, not just for the individual, but for the business, which combines creation and production. And when you take a look at this diagram, what you find is that you expand very quickly out of just the classic data scientists, data engineers, and people who like to code things, and you expand into a much broader range of individuals that need to use, take advantage of, and get benefit from the data science investment. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the KNIME software ecosystem. We only have two products. We have the product for the individuals, and it's complemented by the product that actually allows you to deploy, manage, consume, interact, and basically share and collaborate on lots of things. So everything we talk about in this webinar is talking about the entire ecosystem, because what we're doing is we're focusing on all of the different individuals. Now, we're going to start by diving in on the first one. And for that, I'm going to hand it over to Scott.
All right. So you've got your data science team lead. Hopefully that's you. That's the audience for this webinar. But maybe not. Maybe you fall into one of these other groups. But if you're managing a team, you've got all these different folks that Phil kind of mentioned. Data engineers and data scientists, business analysts, and so forth. Let's start first by talking a little bit about what KNIME can offer for these different roles. So if we look at this slide, there's a lot going on here, I know. If you're not familiar with KNIME as a tool, we have these little colored boxes that you see on the left-hand and right-hand side of your screen. Those are called nodes. And what nodes do are some individual task in your workflow. So maybe that's load some data from a database. Maybe it's build a nice visualization. Maybe it's building a model, right? Training some sort of model. That's what the nodes are for. And you're going to take those nodes, connect them together in what we call a workflow to build an application for what it is that you're trying to do. And so within KNIME, we want to give you a lot of choices within our interface to allow you to mix and match all sorts of different kind of functionality. And what that means is the individuals that are on your team that may be using lots of different tools now can use KNIME, can use a single tool to get done a lot of what they need to do and work together in a more seamless way. So if you look at the top right hand of this diagram here, where it mentions, AI, ML, and DL libraries, maybe that's for your data scientists, right? Those are your folks who are training Keras and TensorFlow models. They're going out and writing code in R and Python and doing that nice data science-y stuff. Well, we've got nodes that can help them with that. And I'll actually show you one node in particular in a minute that I think is particularly advantageous for your coders. But we've got those tools available, but data scientists are not the only folks on your team. You've got your data engineers, folks who are going to need to reach out and touch different databases, maybe blend from MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, get those extracts together, put them into a single format somewhere. Or maybe they need to go out and use via REST API, touch some remote web resources, or maybe it's even as simple as importing some flat files. Data comes from all over, so we give a bunch of different tools to you via these nodes to be able to ingest and do ETL transformation and loading on those data sets. You also have the people on your team who are going to need to tell the story of the analysis, right? These are traditionally kind of your business analyst types of folks. They need to have access to visualizations. And you could do that in KNIME with our integrated Plotly nodes, or if you prefer, you already have a viz tool that you're using like Power BI or Tableau. We have nodes available that will allow you to push directly to those tools so you can continue to use them as you're already doing now. So we have all these different functionalities built in under one hood to satisfy the needs of a bunch of these different folks. One thing that I want to mention here, specifically for the data scientist, and I mention it because it's new, it tackles a problem that is of particular interest to them. So when data scientists are using a tool, Jupyter Notebooks, or just writing in Notepad or something like that, they're going in and they're adding libraries all the time. They're changing that environment as they code, as they bring in additional features that they need. And one of the struggles that sometimes you have is the Python code isn't reusable from your local environment to a remote server environment unless you make sure that it's exactly the same. And that can be kind of trouble to manage, kind of a pain to deal with. And so in the most recent version of KNIME Analytics Platform and Server, we actually have a node that's designed to deal specifically with this problem. It's called the Conda Environment Propagation node. And what it's going to do is it's going to save the environment that your data scientist has built locally in his workflow as he's wireframing everything. And he's going to be able to say, I want to make sure that I have MKL, I want to make sure that I have pandas, I want to make sure that I have, whatever I need, along with the specific version there. He could specify all that, make it very specific, and then when he's running it on the server, that's going to get passed, and you're going to make sure that that environment is replicated in the remote location. So it eliminates a lot of those problems that you have to do with environment management that can be such a hassle. Let your data scientists get back to building cool models and spending less time having to fight with their tool, right? So again, this isn't the be-all, end-all. I just wanted to show that because it's new and cool and is worth highlighting. But stepping back for a second, I want to talk more generally about the KNIME approach and the way that we do things when we build what are called workflows within the tool. So if you haven't seen KNIME before, this is a workflow up here at the top in this area. Just briefly, you read it from left to right. It's ingesting some data. It's doing some partitioning, training a model, scoring that model. It's not really that important what the workflow is doing here. What I want to get across to you is that we build these workflows in KNIME, but then we also have the ability to compartmentalize and kind of shrink down that functionality into a node of its own, so to speak, what we call a component. So why would you want to do that? Well, components have all sorts of nice features when you're working on a data science team with other folks. One feature here, at least specific to the workflow, is that this is self-documenting. When you use a GUI tool like KNIME, you're able to draw these colored boxes, add in descriptive text about what you're doing, add in notes below each node where they're needed to be able to tell the story of the workflow and make it explainable to other folks on your team who may not be data scientists or data engineers, but they can read a workflow and have a general understanding of what's going on. So it just helps you to tell that story. When we're compartmentalizing this information from a workflow down into a component, there's not any limits on what you can do. You can This can be as simple or as complex as you need it to be. You can use whatever nodes are available, whether you're trying to read in data from a database, you're building a Spark model, you're reusing some Python code that somebody's written somewhere else. All of that can be done within a workflow and compartmentalized into a component. So it allows you to mix and match functionality in a really nice way. And once you've boiled things down into a component, then you can reuse that. It's one of the primary features of this, right? I come up with a really cool component to be able to read from a database that I read from all the time. I know that I'm going to have to do it multiple times a week. I can build a component to do that, save myself the trouble of doing it in the future. And also, I can share this component with other folks on my team so that they can use it too. And I have the ability, you'll see here with this little dialog box, I can customize and put interaction points on my component to make it as easy to use as I need it to be for someone else. So in this example, I'm giving somebody a choice of what parameter optimization strategy to use, what target to choose when they're building their model. This could be anything that I show in this dialog box. I completely have control over what options I give to someone else who's using this. I'm effectively putting the guardrails on for them. And letting them use this analytical tool in a way that they're not going to be able to break it or anything. It does exactly what they need them to do. So more at this link down here about how we think about workflows and components and how they can be used. Now, when we're talking about a data science team and the individual roles, how can we use components to bring together folks on our team to build out a more full-featured application? And that's what this slide is attempting to show. We have, again, a workflow that consists of a bunch of different components. It's what we call a guided automation workflow. What it does specifically so much is not important, but what I want to focus on here is the components that are contributed by individual members of the team. So maybe I have a database specialist who's got that perfect extract and done the transformation on it. He's built a component to get that data that we need at the very beginning of the analysis. I've got a component built by my data governance folks. These are going to be your people who are concerned about anonymization of data, about data privacy, about making sure that they comply with whatever government regulations are in place, GDPR or banking or health regulations, right? Really important to be on top of that stuff. And your data governance folks can contribute via components too. Data engineers, folks who are going to need to, do feature engineering and make sure that the data is clean and presented in the proper way. Data science specialist, my data scientist, she's going to have the ability to use whatever algorithms she thinks are most appropriate, set up them, her favorite optimization strategies. All that can be compartmentalized, and we keep on going down the line, right? Python specialist, we want to include some code that's been written somewhere else and reuse it. We can do that within KNIME as well. That's no problem. And then finally, again, the people who need to tell the story ultimately, right? The visualization specialists need to put together that perfect dashboard to make the story of the data interpretable to someone else, maybe even outside the team, just as important as what the other folks are doing. So we want to make sure that when we have a tool that everybody's using, that they're able to contribute, and components allow them to do that in a way that's plug and play and makes sense to everybody that's involved. Now, again, when we're talking about components, something else that's worth pointing out about them that's really important is the idea of instantiation. So I mentioned before the idea of sharing. Say I've come up with a really cool component that does something, builds a really cool model, and I know I'm going to use it in 20 different workflows in my organization, right? And so other folks on my team can use that component I've created in their own workflows, but maybe down the line I say, oh, actually, I've thought of something better. There's a way that I can improve that. Or possibly looking at it the other way, if you're like me, sometimes you make mistakes and there's a bug in the component, you need to go fix it, right? So if we've shared and instantiated that component, then I can make those changes to the component and it's automatically going to be propagated to everyone who's using it. So when they pull up their workflow, it has my component in it already. They get prompted, hey, do you want to get the latest version of this? It's on the server. I can go grab it for you and put it into place right at the beginning. So it's a really nice way to keep all your workflows up to date, make sure that everybody's on the same page, this idea of instantiation. Also, components are, we have security features in place. You can make sure that for particular components, only certain users, only certain groups have access if you need to be able to control that. Versioning and snapshots are incorporated as well. If, I've made a change to a component or a workflow that I built 2 weeks ago, and then I suddenly decide, I need to roll back. I've done something wrong. I want to go back and use that older version. It's no problem if you've taken a snapshot you can just roll back and go about your business. You can also lock and encrypt components if you need to. So if you've got business confidential data, or maybe some specific business confidential method that you've come up with for treating the data or modeling, you can lock and encrypt the component such that it'll be executable and usable to someone else, but they can't necessarily drill down into it and see what you've done or see what data is being used, right? So you have the ability to do that. And another really important thing is the idea of reproducibility, and in particular, backwards compatibility. So at KNIME, this is something that's really important. We want you to be able to open up a workflow that you built 3 months ago, 6 months, a year, 5 years, and still be able to use it, even if KNIME software has updated many revs in the meantime. And in fact, that has happened. We actually had a forum thread a few months ago where somebody posted a workflow that was 10 years old and it still worked. And that's because we have a really important focus on maintaining that backwards compatibility. We don't want you to have to jump through hoops and do forced migrations because you're using stuff with KNIME. We want it to just work. And so we put a lot of effort in behind the scenes to make sure that that's the case.
What I love about this is the fact that everything that you wrote before will work. I have a great story of something that was needed by the Food and Drug Administration. And of course, they demand that they can generate the exact same results. We can go back 10, 11, 12 years ago, pull those things, and it will generate the exact same results. Of course, if we want to refresh the workflow and we want to take advantage of even more features and functionality that have come out in the last 10 years, because that's the cool thing about the KNIME platform, there's new stuff coming all the time. Of course, we can take advantage of that. But what's important is everything from the past continues to work.
Yeah, that's a good point, Philip, especially in a regulatory context.
Absolutely.
That's something that comes up all the time.
Yep.
So when we talk about components, we've talked about sharing and how we can use components within our team, right? But we also want to, because KNIME's an open platform, we want to be able to share with the outside world, right? Or maybe not so much share what we've built with the outside world, although we can do that and we encourage that. But there's also the ability to use what other people have created and posted. And so if you go to hub.knime.com, that's the KNIME Hub, that's a place where you can share workflows that you've built, share components you've created. You can also have access to nodes directly. It's kind of an extension of the node repository that's in the analytics platform already if you're used to using it, and a place to download extensions too. So I can go to the KNIME Hub and do a search for something of interest to me. Like maybe I'm trying to understand better how to use the Keras and TensorFlow nodes within KNIME. Well, there's going to be tons of workflows up there already, along with example data sets that come with the workflows, so that I can download all that information to my local machine, execute it, and see how it works. Okay, I'm starting to get an idea now. Now I can start swapping out nodes. Now I can bring my own data to bear and really make it my own. So this is where you can do that on the KNIME Hub. I'd encourage you to check it out if you haven't already, because there's all sorts of cool stuff up there.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting about this is if you're interested about how KNIME approaches the whole concept of collaboration, this is where you want to take a look, hub.knime.com, because you're going to see features there. You can like things, you can leave comments for things, you can check things in and out, you can set up your own private space so that you can put things and make them available to other people. All of the sort of collaborative things that you would want to do in a team, and through the hub.knime.com, you can see our approach. Very important. We take collaboration in an object-oriented way, much more like GitHub or Bitbucket or something like that does. We are not taking the approach of some of the others out there in the field, and I was confirmed this by the analyst just fairly recently. We are not going to dump everybody into the equivalent of a Google Doc and let everybody edit on it willy-nilly. Yes, that's a form of collaboration, but in our particular space, we think this object-oriented, the component and workflow-oriented way of collaborating is a much better way to get teams working together. Looking forward to get your feedback on that.
Absolutely. Oops, I think I warped a little too quickly there through the slides. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the left-hand side of the diagram that Phil showed before, the data science creation aspect of things, your data scientists and engineers who are building the models, ingesting data, that sort of thing. Now I want to talk about the right side of that, which is going to be the model operations side. So here's where we're talking over here. We're building models, we're blending data, we're optimizing those models. But just as important is actually putting the models that you build into production, right? What's the point of building a model if nobody can use it? So we need to be able to put that up somewhere, have other folks interact with it, consume maybe some reporting that we've generated in an interactive way, be able to compare our models and make sure that they're performing as they should. Do they need to be swapped out? All of this is happening on the data science operations side. And what if there were a way that we could actually tie together the creation and operation aspects, find out where they meet in the middle? Is there something that we could do that would make the lives of both sides of the folks involved in this process easier? And at KNIME, we think we actually have come up with something that does help, and it's called integrated deployment. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that and what it means and how it works. So the idea of integrated deployment, we start with creating some workflow. This is what you see on the middle of the screen on the left-hand side here. This particular workflow is doing some kind of typical steps that you would in building a model. It's reading in some data, it's doing some ETL on it here in this middle section. It trains a model and optimizes that model, and then it normalizes and does some predictions on it. Okay, so those are fairly standard steps. But what if we could take the steps that we know are going to have to be used on both the creation side of things and the production side of things and automatically tie that together? And that's what we've tried to do with integrated deployment. If we look at these purple nodes, maybe a little bit hard to see, but this says capture workflow start on the left-hand side and capture workflow end on the right. So anything between a start and end node that I have here is basically going to be set aside so that I can use it later. So here I'm taking my custom data pre-processing section because I know I'm going to need that in my production workflow. And I'm also taking the actual prediction portion and setting it aside as well. And whatever I set aside, I can then use with a workflow combiner and workflow writer, it turns out, to automatically generate this production workflow, which is what you see at the bottom. This section right here, the custom data pre-processing, matches exactly what I captured before. And this section with the normalization and predictor, again, matches what I captured before. So why would I want to do this? Well, it turns out that building workflows this way, building the creation workflow and then automatically creating the production workflow, eliminates that gap between the creation and production. If you've had to do this before, then you know that there's some stumbling blocks, trying to get things into production. Here, I'm marking just what I know is going to be necessary by using these start and end nodes. And it turns out, right, that's not just the model itself. It's any relevant pre-processing steps that need to happen, or really anything else that you can think of that you would need to include in the production workflow. You just add the start and end nodes around it. Because we're generating this second workflow automatically, there's no manual intervention. I don't have to copy and paste nodes from one workflow to another. I don't have to move data around manually or introduce any of these potential pain points or sources of error along the way. I'm doing this in an automated fashion. When I capture these nodes here to put them into my production workflow, all of the settings are automatically being captured as well, so I don't have to go in and reconfigure everything. It's always going to be in sync is the point. So that means that if I decide later in my creation workflow, I want to use a different algorithm here, or my optimization strategy is not quite right, I need to change it. Whatever I change in this creation workflow is going to be propagated to the production. They're always going to be lined up. That's just one less thing I have to think about when I'm actually getting this into deployment. We could go on and on at length about integrated deployment, but I'll stop here. And what I'll say is at our past summit, our CEO, Michael Berthold, gave a pretty lengthy talk about our approach to this and why we think it's not only useful, but really necessary in a lot of contexts. You can check that out on our YouTube channel if you'd like to know more. Okay, and let me talk a little bit about how we actually put these into production. So it's not just about building the workflows. On the KNIME server side, we actually have some features that we offer that you're going to need to be able to execute these things while, when they're in production. So this is going to include things like scheduling. I need to run my models overnight, or if I need to run them, as soon as this workflow finishes, I want to run it again. You can set up scheduling however you want. And in fact, you can include triggering that as well. So if I run workflow A, depending on the output of that workflow, maybe I then call the next workflow immediately B, or if something's gone wrong, I send a notification, run a different workflow. I can have some logic and some chaining built into my workflow triggering that's happening on the server, which kind of gives you an extra layer of being able to deploy and automate these things. There's also the ability to call your different workflows that you have. You can use a REST API to do that. And in fact, you can have completely separate applications outside of KNIME using the REST API to call those workflows to get, for example, model predictions on demand. And then you also have the ability to view and edit and execute workflows remotely. If I have a particularly long running workflow that I know is going to take several hours and it's, going through a lot of data, I can log into the server and see a visual representation through my analytics platform of where it is in the process, what branches did it take, what logic did it use, how exactly is it working. I can see all of that at a glance. Something else worth pointing out here, too, is the idea of operationalizing. So we have something called the KNIME Model Process Factory that can help with that. If you look at this top diagram on the left, you see, for example, maybe I have some model in production. It's running with fairly high accuracy, but as we know, models aren't perfect and they decay over time as we introduce, new variables or errors or things just change, right? Models aren't going to be perfect forever. So over time, the accuracy is going to drop. We can set up our model process factory to, when it hits a particular quality threshold, maybe my accuracy is too low, I can automatically retrain the model, put that new model into production, bump my accuracy back up and go along about its business. Or maybe the accuracy has dropped really low such that automated retraining is not enough. I need some manual intervention. I can send a ping to my data scientist on Slack and say, hey, go check this workflow, something's wrong. All of that can be kicked off by the workflow itself. We also have this idea of a champion challenger type of paradigm, which you may be familiar with. Maybe I have my champion model, my best performing model in production. It's doing its thing. Maybe it's even running really well. But what I can also be doing in the background is creating a challenger model with maybe different parameters or a different algorithm or something. If I happen along the way to come up with a model that performs better than my existing champion, well, then I can set up the model process factory to essentially just swap those out automatically, such that I'm going to be using the best performing model all of the time. So you can automate that, or you can put in steps along the way to make sure human intervention is going to be called for when it's required. That's all up to you. But we have fully working blueprints of how all this can be set up in the model process factory. There's an extensive white paper about it. If you'd like to learn more about it, you can check out this link below. So now I'm going to stop for a second and hand it back over to Phil. He's going to talk to you about some of these other personas that we've discussed earlier.
Okay, thanks, Scott. The interesting thing about this, of course, is that up until now, you can probably relate to your job at the moment. You're a team leader, you're a data science, you're a data engineer, you're a coder, or you're responsible for model operations. Those are sort of the classic functions. But what we find is that there's a lot more that goes into this than just the classic functions. There's lots of different kinds of business users that need to take advantage of and be pulled into this, and maybe even be given access to the data science platform that you choose. We've also got some of the influencers or the people that will be affected by it, such as IT operations and compliance. Let's take a look over the business analyst and the classic users first. The first thing we've had, Scott's already mentioned it, I have a great example here. We've got to empower those business users. We've got to give them the ability to go beyond their BI tool, beyond their visualization tool of choice, which, let's face it, in the world, the number one tool of choice is Excel, and stop doing everything in the code behind the scenes and give them the ability to do some of this advanced, controlled, structured things that the KNIME platform can do so that it can be automatically fed into their tool of choice, whether that be Power BI, Tableau, or whatever. The example here on the screen is one I want to highlight. This is Excel. This is not just having KNIME dump data into a CSV file. This is KNIME actually building and controlling all aspects of the Excel spreadsheet that's being generated for the business user to use. And I'd like to thank Continental, yes, the tire company, because they actually were the ones that developed a set of nodes. They contributed to the KNIME community. Everybody has access to them, and they actually make it so that you can use Excel as your advanced visualization tool if you want. Just one example. Next slide, please. But one of the things we find is there's a tremendous amount of users that want to go beyond their tool of choice. They know their data. They're willing to go in and start manipulating information. They don't want to learn how to code, and they really like the KNIME graphical user interface. Well, the KNIME GUI and our workbench concept with the node connectors is very easy to understand. Of course, with 3,000, 3,500 nodes, that might be a little much to give to absolutely everybody. They won't be interested in everything. So what we do is we've built in the ability for an organization from their central infrastructure to push out tailored versions of the KNIME Analytics platform. Now, remember, the KNIME Analytics platform will work locally on Windows. It will work on Mac. You can work on a Linux version. It can work up in the cloud. And of course, combined with KNIME Server, we can mix and match that in any way. So we can actually tailor a specific copy of the KNIME Analytics platform with just the nodes they need, just the components they need, just the help they need, so that they can start taking advantage of this wonderful paradigm. Something very important here is that KNIME built in has what we call recommendation engine. This is the workflow coach. What this does is it takes the knowledge of the wisdom of the crowd, either the public community that provides its data, or even within your organization, if you've set it up that way with KNIME Server, so that it makes recommendations. If I've started with an Excel reader, what's normally the next thing I would have to do in sequence? So there's a lot of capabilities here for focusing this wonderful platform down to the needs of the business users. This is very popular. As a matter of fact, there's another webinar talking about just business users, in this case in the financial industry, all around Excel, and how you might want to use this for that, to empower that group of users. Next slide, please. And the final group I'd like to talk about are all of those users who will never create, but they want to be able to use appropriately. Now, what does that mean? Some people just want to have an application that when they start it up over their web portal or whatever, they click a button and it does exactly what they need. They get the results in the right form. You've already seen Scott show an example of how we can build workflows that create interactive applications. But what we find is that depending upon the type of user, depending upon the tasks that they need to perform, sometimes they need more or less interaction. That's all possible with this concept of components that build what we call guided applications, where we're balancing the appropriate level of automation with the appropriate level of interaction based on the task and the audience at hand. So this is something that your teams would be building these applications, but it's very straightforward to do. And we've got some wonderful examples. A wonderful concept that will keep you from having to go to lots of HTML programmers. More information at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. Now, we're going to move off the business analysts and all of the different types of end users and move down to the far right-hand corner. You've got people in your organizations who are responsible for compliance. They're worried about risk. They're worried about government regulations. They're worried about GDPR and privacy. We need, as a team, to make sure that we're taking care of their needs and their requirements so that we all don't get in trouble. And so what KNIME's done there is added some capabilities in it to make the life of the compliance people a little easier. What you're going to see here first is something called explainability and interpretability. A data science, of course, always wants to understand, what is it in my model? What did I use? What features caused it? How can I look at what affects my model? But more importantly, there's more and more government requirements that you need to be able to explain and interpret a model to someone who's not a data science expert. Now, I have taken all of the most important features and capabilities out there in the research area, pulled them in and make them available, not just for the data science, but also as some components. And you can see some of the visual types of things we're doing. Lots of work there on explainability and interpretability of models, something that compliance, not just data science, but compliance finds important. Next slide, please. Another topic is data privacy. KNIME takes this very, very seriously. We know that each one of us is going to have a different need and a different requirement around the data we capture and maintain about individuals. We need to follow laws, but we also want to be smart. What KNIME does there is a two-step thing. The first is we offer a whole series of components and examples showing how in your teams you can create GDPR or privacy policy compliant workflows and applications, lots and lots of details there. You can find out more about it down at the bottom. The other topic, of course, has to do with anonymization. If we have to use the data, but it's private, how do we transform it in such a way that it still sparkles and can be used by data science, but remove the individual data that causes a compliance problem? It's called anonymization. And again, there's a whole series of nodes, really, really advanced. This was made by a specialist partner of KNIME who contributed the nodes to the KNIME community around anonymization. So check that out if it's important to you. The next comment has to do with how do we document? How do we track? How do we go through and do lineage of all sorts of different type? Now, KNIME workflows are self-documenting. Under the hood, what we are doing is we are storing all of the different metadata facts that help us build that workflow. We now make the ability to surface all of that data about the metadata, what's happening, where's it coming from, what transformation, what settings, what happened when it execute. Every single step, every single key feature is available for extraction so that you can go and do all sorts of data or model lineage. For example, what data went into creating this model? Where did it come from? What transformations did it go through? Lots and lots of things in that topic, very important for governance and compliance, and also for the data science team leader who's trying to make sure that people are using best practices. This way of documenting is really, really good because we provide the metadata and the mapping. More details are down at the bottom. Next slide, please. Okay, we're now back to IT operations and some of their requirements, and it's time to hand back over to Scott.
Yeah, so we've talked about all of these other folks except for the IT ops guys, and maybe they're kind of the forgotten folks sometimes, but because they're not the ones making the cool models or building the nice visualizations that everybody gets to see, but they're just as important, right? If we don't have somebody out there who's organizing our compute power and making sure those resources are available to everyone and that everything's secure, then none of the rest of the stuff can work, right? So we've put into place some features on the KNIME server that I want to talk about that are specifically aimed at the IT operations folks. So starting here, we're talking about the idea of managing infrastructure and users. So if you have a KNIME server, one of the things that you can do, let's say you have 100 analytics platform users within your organization. You can centrally manage those analytics platform clients by using the server such that you can say, okay, I'm going to make sure that only these particular nodes or extensions are allowed. I can make sure that for my coders, the Python environments that they have installed, for example, are all synced up. Everybody's using the same libraries. You have control over all of that using the KNIME server, which is a nice feature just to provide that consistency for your users within your organization. You can also customize, the look and feel if you want to. There's that little screenshot here in the middle. If you want to make things look less NIME and more like your organization on the web portal, for example, add your logo. That's no problem. All stuff you can do. And then we'll get into a little bit more here. It's kind of the general features of the KNIME server, things like running and scheduling jobs. What does that look like? Changing your permissions and service management. I'll get to that a little later. One thing I wanted to mention that particularly makes folks' life easier on the IT side is the idea of single sign-on. So maybe you're using LDAP or Active Directory or OAuth in your organization already to allow people to sign in to all sorts of systems and tools that they may use. So with KNIME, we allow you to do that as well. You can make your choice. Integrate that single sign-on to your KNIME server so that somebody basically logs onto the web page, gets a token, sends that token to the server. They're logged in. You don't have to worry about managing a bunch of different identities and all of this stuff manually. We can just handle that for you. So there's a lot going on in this slide. This slide is all about, I would say, flexibility in how you use your resources. So let me start on the left-hand side. Let's say, I'm a user, I'm Scott, and I've got a cool workflow that's building a model, and I'm going to send that to my KNIME server. Now, my KNIME server may be located on-prem. It may be located in the cloud on Amazon. It may be located in Azure. As a software company, we don't care where you put it. That's completely up to you. Flexibility, right? And then the KNIME server is going to say, okay, now it's time for me to execute that workflow. I'm going to send it to what we call an executor, the piece of our software that actually runs the workflows. Now, I may have different executor groups, meaning different hardware that's dedicated and has different configurations according to the folks who are going to use it. So maybe, for example, my marketing team here in this red executor group 1, they have a need for higher RAM on their workflows. They need more memory availability because they're pushing through a lot of data or something. Okay, that's fine. That may be different from executor group 4 down here in my engineering team, who they've got to make sure that they have GPU because they're running some really heavy duty predictive models. I can set up executor groups to make sure that whether, again, it's on-prem or in the cloud, whatever executors and those machines are available to them is going to meet their needs. So they're not having to fight over the different resources. You may have run into this in trying to manage these sorts of things in the past. I have myself, where somebody comes along and presses the button, runs their workflow, and all of a sudden it sucks up 95% of your resources and nobody else can do anything. Well, let's put the appropriate caveats in place to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? And we can do that using executor groups and smart allocation of our resources. The other thing that's worth talking about here is the idea of scaling, especially as it applies to the cloud. So let's say, 90% of the time I'm perfectly happy running no more than 10 or 15 workflows. But then 10% of my year, I've got to run 50 or 100 workflows. I have a really high demand peak in what it is that I need to do. And so we can use the power of the cloud to help with that by using scaling and automatically calling up additional instances on demand to make sure that there's going to be compute available for the workflows that we need to run. And when we don't need them anymore, when that demand peak has passed, then we can automatically have those servers shut down so that we're not paying for them anymore, right? It's an effective way to control your costs. That's what the whole idea of scaling is about, and KNIME can help you do that. We can take a hybrid approach where you have some of your server on-prem, or some of your executors on-prem rather, some of them in the cloud. It doesn't matter as far as we're concerned. You do it in the way that makes the most sense for your organization because you know what your needs are, right? We're trying to provide, again, flexibility, which is the whole point of this rather colorful slide.
Yeah, Scott, this is what gets interesting for all of us. Scott and I have been in some conversations recently that are just fascinating. So we're in some organizations where they want to have the KNIME server installed locally. They want to have some executors locally, and then they want to reach out to their cloud of choice for some, for peak times to be able to reach out and get some extra resources whenever they need it. That's absolutely fantastic. There's other organizations that want to have absolutely everything in the cloud. No problem. You can allow that as well. Remember, those users may be going through a web interface, or those users may be people down with the KNIME Analytics platform actually talking to the server. So they have the KNIME Analytics platform on their PC and they're talking to the server in some way. The most fascinating one, though, is a large manufacturing organization in Europe. They've decided to put their KNIME server up into the cloud. And what they're going to do is they're reaching out with executors back down onto their plant floor. So they're controlling everything from the cloud, but they've got some use cases. Which one works best? Have no idea. It really depends. It's all up to you. We don't care. We're going to try to make sure that it's flexible as possible so that you can mix and match and also change quite quickly when you need to.
Yep, thanks, Phil. But flexibility that's really the key. You know best, so we try and give you the tools to make it work. I want to show you a few slides now. These are about the KNIME server and are from the latest version of KNIME server, where we've made some changes to the interface. Again, this is about making the IT ops folks' lives easier, people who have to monitor, for example, jobs. I can pull up this new interface that we have. I can look and see, okay, who exactly is running what, who created this job at a particular time, what's the status of the job, and if there's something wrong with it or it requires some additional interaction, I can get an idea at a glance of what the workflow messages are. Do I need to cancel this job? What do I need to do, right? See exactly paths to the different workflows, and I can organize all that stuff with the table control. So this is all available to me as an administrator at a glance to be able to make sure, again, my resources are being used in a way that makes sense for my organization. This extends to the idea of schedules too, right? So we want to make sure that we're running things at an appropriate time. We don't put too much of a load on the machine when we don't want to. So I can look at individual schedules, see when they're going to kick off and who is responsible for it, see the jobs associated with that schedule, as well as the health of the jobs. And if I need to go in and turn these schedules off, that's no problem. Temporarily, I just flip the switch and I can turn it off. So again, kind of a similar concept, but for schedules instead of jobs. And then also we have a bit of a display here for the executors. So we mentioned executor groups in the previous slide. This is only showing one executor group, although you could have many, and only one executor in that group, although you could have many executors in one group. We're just trying to keep the slide simple here. But you can see that I can, at a glance, see things like, okay, how much memory is being used, how much compute load is on the system, how many tokens associated with my license are allocated to this particular executor, all that stuff, the version is all there, as well as, again, what jobs have been run recently. So
I'm going to go ahead and answer.
happening.
I'd like to answer one question really quickly while you've got this slide on the screen that's come up in the QA. And somebody said, can I actually manage my resources and see? You can see here some of the things we can do. We're not showing you an example of the logs as well, but of course, that's the place where everything gets tracked. So just to sort of preempt that question that's going to come up later, this is where you can get the total overview of what's going on with your jobs, your schedules, your executors, and it's all captured also in the logs so that you can go back and evaluate, where was it getting tight?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's good to mention that here while we're mentioning, and that allows me to mention too, as we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon here. So if you do have questions, now's the time to get them in the chat to make sure that we have time to address all those during the Q&A at the very end. So please type away if there's something that's top of mind.
Yeah, because that's what we love.
And actually, with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Phil, to talk about some of the hybrid scaling strategy here.
One of the things that you're going to ask now is, oh my God, with all that flexibility, what do we do? Well, we can't give you an absolute answer, but from our experience, we can tell you a way forward, whether it's on-prem, cloud, hybrid, scaling, what's important for you. There's a reference to at the bottom of this slide, and before anybody else asks, everybody gets the slides immediately after the presentation in an email. So don't worry about that, because there's so many references in here you're going to want to check out. But this is a great 6-step approach to going through and deciding, hey, for our particular application, our particular usage scenario, what's going to work best for us? So I can highly recommend that white paper. Next, please. Another topic on the IT side, which is very important, is knowing about security protocols. It's not just about log in and log out. It's everything designed around KNIME software, what we do to make sure that it is safe and secure, how it can be embedded into your organization. This document here has an awful lot of the questions and answers that the IT security protocol people are going to want to know. So once again, if you're going to check out KNIME yourself, make sure you get this document for your IT people, because it's got lots of the answers of what they need to know. Next slide, please. And there we have it. What we've done very shortly in about 40 minutes is we've run around showing a little bit about all the stakeholders involved in data scientists and some of the capabilities that KNIME can bring you and your team as you move forward. Next slide, please. We've tried to take a look at both sides of these. Now, we've put a very heavy emphasis on the entire circle, not just on the left-hand side. For those of you that are data scientists and interested in running KNIME on your laptop, downloading it, no problem, go off and do that. But we focused on some of the high-level issues that actually pull everything together for across the loop. Next slide, please. And what you're going to see here, and you can read this in the slides afterwards, over there on the left, that's some of the reasons that people download and use KNIME for their individual work, why they really, really like it. And if you don't know KNIME, I can highly recommend, go to our website, click on download the KNIME Analytics Platform. Remember, it's open source, it's free, you don't even have to register, and you can start working with it. But here on the right, when it comes to some of the business requirements, these are some of the topics we've summarized through. Next slide, please. And we're coming up to the end here. What we've looked at is the KNIME software platform across the enterprise. We haven't really split up either one of these two, because it's really both of them together that are there for the business. I think that pretty much wraps it up. Once again, everybody will get the slides after this, so don't worry. Thank you very much for sticking around. It looks like almost absolutely everybody did. That's a wonderful feeling from my side here in Heidelberg. It's time for me to sign off and enjoy the evening. And Scott, great working with you.
Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you soon.
Okay, take care.